Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is episode 119, and today we are really getting into something foundational.
We are.
We're tackling a question that, has been at the heart of philosophy and law for, well, forever.
For millennia.
And it's a question that's been sharpened and I think really illuminated by the insights in the book CourtRoom Stories, researched by Mr. Zahir Ahmad Mir.
Right.
The question is this: where do you draw the line? Where does loyalty to the state end? And where does loyalty to your own conscience, your own morality, begin?
It's arguably the ultimate tension in any organized society, isn't it? I mean, that's why this deep dive is so important.
Exactly.
The source material we're drawing from, based on those courtroom stories and all the legal research packed into them, it doesn't just, pose a theoretical question. It actually tries to provide a structural answer.
An answer based on what, exactly?
Based on law, on morality, and on historical precedent. It specifically sets up the individual's right, and I think this is the key part: their duty to resist an illegal or unjust order.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Let's really get into it. Our mission today is a big one. We want to distill four foundational pillars that define exactly where the power of the state, where it bumps up against an individual's moral and legal duty to disobey.
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't just some abstract philosophy for a classroom. This is about understanding the practical principles that empower you.
Right.
Whether you're a concerned citizen, a soldier, a civil servant, it doesn't matter. These principles are what allow you to stand against potential institutional overreach or corruption.
It's about clarity.
Yes, this is where you get that clarity on where true defensible authority actually resides.
Precisely. We are analyzing the legitimacy of a command through a really rigorous multi-layered framework.
A framework from the source material.
Yes.
Yeah.
The sources we've synthesized outline four interlocking concepts. They basically create a kind of integrated defense system for the rule of law. And it moves really seamlessly from the deepest historical moral requirement all the way through to modern actionable jurisprudence.
So let's lay out that structure for everyone. The four pillars that support this mandate of disobedience.
Let's do it.
It starts with, you said, a moral requirement. So obedience is conditional on justice.
That's the foundation.
Then that idea gets formalized into a global legal benchmark, which is constitutional morality.
Correct. The modern standard.
And then these principles, they're not just ideas, they're actively enforced by an institutional safeguard.
Democratic jurisprudence.
Right. And finally, all three of those pillars, they come together, they converge to form the core conclusion, the ratio, as the source calls it.
The actionable principle.
Which is, illegal orders deserve disobedience.
It's a complete interlocking system. It defines the legitimacy of power, not by who's giving the order, a president, a general, a minister.
It's the source of the power.
Right. It defines legitimacy entirely by its application. Is it just? Is it legal? If the application fails either of those tests,
the authority just collapses.
It collapses. The order has no standing.
Okay, so let's dive in. Let's start with that deepest foundation. Pillar one, the moral foundation. This idea of obedience conditional on justice, drawing heavily on the Islamic context mentioned in our sources.
It's the critical starting point.
Why there? Why start with morality before we even get to the law books?
Because it establishes a constraint on power that is older, and I would argue more fundamental than any written constitution. The core concept here is that absolute obedience, total, unquestioning submission, that is reserved for one thing only.
And that is?
What is fundamentally just and eternally right. Therefore, any temporal human authority, any government, any ruler, has to submit its commands to this higher moral scrutiny.
So when we use this term conditional obedience, what we're really saying is that the state's power, the authority given to any public official, it's inherently fragile.
Precarious is a good word for it, yeah.
Its legitimacy only holds up as long as it operates strictly within the bounds of justice, or edel.
Exactly, edel.
And if that standard of edel is breached, the legitimacy of the command just, it's automatically revoked.
That's the core of it. We have to look at the theological and historical framework that makes this condition necessary. Within this tradition, and frankly, within many great philosophical traditions, authority isn't seen as a right.
It's not an entitlement.
No. It's conceived as a trust, an amanah. A ruler, or the entire state structure, is entrusted with the well-being, the security, and the just governance of the people. It's a profound responsibility, not a perk of the job.
I want to focus on that word amanah, that idea of a trust, because that seems to carry huge weight even in a modern secular legal sense. If authority is a trust, how does violating it actually dissolve the requirement to comply?
Well, amanah is a kind of a dual concept. It means the authority is entrusted to the ruler, sure, but it's also a trust held for the people, and it's held under a higher law.
So it's not a simple one-way delegation of power.
Not at all. It's a contract with multiple parties. So when a state or an agent of the state issues an unjust or an illegal order, what they're doing is committing a breach of that amanah,
They're breaking the contract.
a fundamental violation of the foundational contract. And when that contract is breached through injustice or illegality, the moral requirement for compliance on the part of, say, the citizen or the employee, it doesn't just get weaker.
What?
It essentially evaporates. It's gone. The contract of obedience is mutually dependent on the contract of justice. One can't exist without the other.
Wow, that's a fascinating reversal of how we normally think about power.
It is.
It means that if the state is acting justly, then my obedience is a moral good. It
Yeah.
reinforces stability, social order, all of that.
Correct.
But if the state acts unjustly, that moral imperative completely flips. The
Right.
failure of the state actually creates a moral duty for me to resist.
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head. The source material, rooted in these very principles, implies that refusing to comply with an unjust or illegal order, it's not just an optional act of protest.
It becomes a duty.
It becomes a non-negotiable moral duty. And this is the point that really distinguishes this philosophy. It places a massive, and I would say unavoidable, burden of responsibility on every single individual actor.
So no one gets to just be a cog in the machine.
No one. It forces them to assess every single directive they receive against a higher standard than just, was the paperwork filled out correctly, or am I going to get in trouble with my boss?
Okay, let's make this real. Let's use an example. Imagine a civil servant, a clerk, an administrator at a local level.
Okay.
They get an order, it's perfectly stamped, perfectly signed, looks completely official, and it instructs them to, say, manipulate land records to help on someone who is politically connected.
A classic case.
Or maybe divert relief funds away from a community that's out of favor. The order is procedurally correct, but it fundamentally violates this idea of adl, of justice. What's the consequence if they comply?
Under this framework, the consequence is that they are not merely following an order, they are actively participating in the violation of the amanah.
They share the guilt.
They share the burden of the injustice. This framework absolutely demolishes the defense of, I was just following orders.
The Nuremberg defense.
Gone, because it asserts that the individual has an inherent moral and rational faculty. They are capable of judging the lawfulness and the justice of the command they're given. Their first duty is not some transactional loyalty to their superior.
Right.
Their first duty is fidelity to the higher concept of justice upon which the state's entire legitimacy rests.
But, the historical counterargument, the criticism, is always that this kind of conditional obedience, it leads to anarchy. It leads to chaos where every single official becomes their own subjective judge of what the law is.
A fair and a vital challenge.
So how does this philosophy counter that risk?
The full answer really lies in the later pillars we'll discuss, especially the institutional safeguard in Pillar 3. But even here, at this foundational moral level, the check isn't purely subjective. It's not just about what I feel is right. The adl that's being sought isn't some arbitrary personal preference. It's an objective, reasoned justice. And it's often defined by established societal norms and, crucially, by the very laws the state itself claims to uphold.
So the person resisting is actually the one upholding the system.
In a way, yes. The refusal to comply is an act of upholding the true system, not attacking it. It sets the baseline. Power must be justifiable on objective moral grounds. The next pillars just formalize how we apply that objective standard.
And that's a perfect transition. That historical evolution from an internal moral check to an external codified legal check. We've set up the moral requirement for justice. Now let's look at how modern systems formalize and enforce that standard around the world.
Let's do it.
That brings us to Pillar 2, the global standard constitutional morality.
Yes. And if Pillar 1 is let's call it the soul of resistance,
I like that.
then constitutional morality is the body that gives it legal form. And this is a powerful modern concept that goes way beyond specific legal codes or statutes.
So what is it? What is constitutional morality? It's not just following the Constitution, right?
No, not at all. It's not defined as merely adhering to the literal black and white text of the Constitution. It's not about the footnotes. It is the unwavering commitment to uphold the core spirit,
His spirit.
the overarching values, the foundational principles that are embedded within that document. Ideals like liberty, equality, non-discrimination, human dignity, the big stuff.
This is a really crucial distinction, I think, because it means a state actor could, in theory, get an order that is perfectly legal according to some low-level statute. Maybe it's even signed by the right minister.
Sure.
But if carrying out that order fundamentally violates the spirit of, say, equality that's guaranteed in the Constitution, maybe through systemic exclusion or unfairly targeting a specific group of people, then it breaches constitutional morality.
Absolutely. And to really get this, we have to contrast constitutional morality with its opposite, which is legal positivism.
Okay, define that for us.
Positivism basically argues that a law is a law because it was enacted by the proper authority, period. It doesn't matter what its moral content is. If Parliament voted for it, it's the law. End of story.
But constitutional morality says.
Constitutional morality operates much closer to a natural law approach. It asserts that the authority of the law itself is conditional. It's conditional on its fidelity to the supreme pre-existing values of the Constitution. It acts as this crucial, unyielding limit on what the state can do.
So the state can't use the technicalities of the law as a weapon against the spirit of its own founding document.
It can't.
And I think this idea, the constitutional check on the majority, is so often misunderstood. You know, in public discourse about democracy, we tend to think that if the majority votes for a law, it must be legitimate.
And that's the vital safeguard constitutional morality provides. Democracy isn't just majority rule, it's majority rule subject to fundamental rights.
The majority doesn't get to vote away the rights of the minority.
Precisely. Constitutional morality protects these rights. And crucially, it protects minorities from being bulldozed by temporary legislative or executive majorities. The state cannot order actions that fundamentally undermine its own identity.
Can you give us a concrete example, something that really illustrates this tension between a technical law and constitutional morality?
Of course. Let's consider a scenario. Imagine that, in a moment of perceived national crisis, the legislature passes some kind of emergency law.
Okay.
And this law allows for the suspension of habeas corpus and for indefinite preventative detention of individuals based on, say, association rather than a proven crime.
So you can be locked up not for what you did, but for who you know.
Exactly. Now, a legal positivist might argue that since the legislature passed the law correctly, following all the procedures, state officials must comply with the detention orders. The law is the law.
But constitutional morality steps in and says what?
It says that the state, by its own foundational principles, is committed to human dignity, to due process, to the non-arbitrary use of power. It says that even if the law was procedurally correct, if the mass application of these detention orders violates the core spirit of liberty and due process that's guaranteed to all citizens,
then the order is unconstitutional.
It's unconstitutional in its essence, regardless of the parliamentary vote. The individual official who receives that detention warrant has a higher duty to the constitutional spirit than they do to the emergency measure.
So they're effectively saying, I am a servant of the Constitution, which is permanent, not just a servant of the temporary, maybe panicked, dictates of the current government.
That is the empowerment.
And this moves resistance from being just an internal moral struggle to being an externally recognized, legally defensible act.
Exactly. When you have a robust culture of constitutional morality, the state can't escape scrutiny by hiding behind procedure. The individual is empowered not by relying only on their private, subjective assessment of right and wrong, but by appealing to the supreme codified law of the land. And that codification is absolutely essential for stability because it gives the person who resists a tangible legal shield.
But this takes us right back to that practical question again. Who is the final judge? Who gets to decide how do we stop this from just becoming a mess of subjective interpretations?
And that's the bridge.
That leads us seamlessly to Pillar 3. This is the enforcement mechanism, the institutional safeguard democratic jurisprudence.
Yes.
And given the context of our source material, True Courtroom Stories, researched by Mr. Zahir Ahmad Mir, this pillar seems especially relevant for places where institutional accountability is, let's say, frequently challenged.
This is where the theory gets its teeth. This is where it becomes real. We've established the moral why, that's justice, and the legal what, that's the constitutional spirit. Now we have to address the how. Who decides in the complex, high-stakes environment of a real courtroom or a government office if an order truly violates these principles. That is the function of democratic jurisprudence.
Okay, so define that term for us clearly, because we all know what judicial review is, but democratic jurisprudence sounds more specific. It sounds more assertive.
It is more assertive. You're right. Democratic jurisprudence isn't just passive judicial review where a court waits for a case to come to it. It's a philosophy that actively guides the courts. It compels them to interpret the law and the Constitution in a way that maximizes democratic norms, that maximizes institutional accountability and fundamental rights.
So it's an activist judiciary in a sense.
It's an interpretation that looks beyond the mere text to ensure the state is actually functioning as a genuinely democratic entity and not just a technically compliant bureaucracy.
So the courts are essentially looking at the outcome, not just the process. They're actively asking, does the result of this law or this order support, or does it undermine the broader democratic project and the rights it promises?
Precisely. The judiciary takes on the role of the ultimate guardian, a kind of democratic sentinel, if you will.
A sentinel?
In this framework, courts serve as the essential independent check against illegal, arbitrary, or unconstitutional state actions. They are the institutions that clarify which orders cross the line into illegality and are therefore deemed to deserve disobedience.
The source material, those courtroom stories, are set in a context that often faces institutional challenges to the rule of law. So why is this specific philosophy, democratic jurisprudence, so uniquely critical in, say, fragile or developing democratic environments?
It's absolutely crucial. In environments where institutional norms might be underdeveloped, or where very powerful organs of the state like the military, intelligence agencies, or an unchecked executive branch may frequently overstep their constitutional mandate, the judiciary becomes the last bastion.
The last line of defense.
The last line of defense. The courts can't just sit back and wait for the executive to self-correct. It might never happen. They have to adopt a jurisprudence that is proactive in protecting institutional accountability and the rights of citizens.
And how does this jurisprudence then empower the individual state actor that we read about in these court stories? Yeah. How does it help them on a practical level?
It provides them with an absolute defense. Think about the types of cases the source material implies. Cases involving resistance to illegal land grabs or mandates to engage in corruption or politically motivated detentions.
Right.
Democratic jurisprudence ensures that the laws are interpreted in a way that shields the official who resisted the illegal command, while at the same time holding the superior who issued it accountable.
Okay, so let's walk through that. An official, let's say a mid-level revenue collector, is ordered by a powerful superior to, I don't know, erase a property lien for a corrupt politician.
A classic scenario.
They refuse.
Yeah.
They know it's wrong. If democratic jurisprudence is applied correctly, it means the court will back their refusal. It could save their career, and it certainly affirms their legal position.
That is the empowerment mechanism in action. It formalizes the individual's Pillar 1 moral duty into a recognized, protected, professional obligation. The judiciary essentially sanctions the act of righteous resistance by providing the legal infrastructure that says, loud and clear, your loyalty must be to the Constitution, not to the individual who happened to sign the illegal directive. The sources highlight how this framework actively encourages state employees to rely on these established principles. It makes the moral choice also the legally sound choice.
It's the mechanism that prevents the state from just crumbling from within. Because if the rule of law only applies at the very top and everyone below is just following orders, the whole system is fundamentally brittle.
Exactly. This institutional check ensures that legal fidelity runs through the veins of the entire bureaucratic structure.
And are there specific legal doctrines that support this?
Oh, absolutely. This is often reflected in specific judicial doctrines, like the principle that public power can only be exercised for the public good. It can never be used for private gain or for a political vendetta. Any order that lacks that public interest is inherently vulnerable. It's susceptible to being struck down under democratic jurisprudence, which immediately justifies disobedience.
Okay, this is a massive case you've built across these three pillars. It's incredibly detailed.
It's all there in the sources.
We've established the moral basis in Pillar 1, the codified standard in Pillar 2, and the institutional defender in Pillar 3. So now we have to arrive at the core, actionable conclusion of the source material.
A final step.
Pillar 4, the mandate. Illegal orders deserve disobedience.
This is the synthesis. This is the ratio, the binding ruling principle. By asserting that illegal orders deserve disobedience, the entire legal and moral frame of reference shifts.
Awesome.
We are no longer debating whether resistance is merely acceptable. We're not asking if it's permissible. We are confirming that compliance is unacceptable and, in fact, legally hazardous. The illegal order warrants no other response than outright rejection.
Okay, so let's define illegal order one last time in this specific context, because its meaning has gained so much weight across these three pillars. It's not just a typo in a memo.
No, it is far more than a technical error. An illegal order, in this powerful context, is an order that is fundamentally deficient because it violates any of the three foundational criteria we've discussed.
So it's an order that fails the test of.
It's an order that fails the condition of objective justice, that's Pillar 1, or it breaches the core spirit of the Constitution, Pillar 2, or it runs contrary to the tenets of democratic accountability enforced by the judiciary, which is Pillar 3. If any single link in that chain breaks, the order is illegitimate, it's void.
The power shift implied by that word, deserve.
Yeah.
It feels like it completely upends the traditional hierarchy.
It does.
It suggests that when the law is breached, the default position shifts from, I should probably obey, to, I must resist.
Yes. Disobedience is reframed. It is no longer insubordination against a superior officer. It's redefined as the ultimate act of fidelity.
Fidelity to what?
Fidelity to the higher legal and moral order, fidelity to the rule of law itself, and fidelity to the founding values of the state. The command, by being illegal and unjust, loses all moral and legal claim on the person who receives it. It deserves to be rejected because it represents corruption or injustice or tyranny manifesting itself in the command structure.
But this brings us back to the stark reality, the reality faced by the people in these court stories. If an individual officer disobeys, aren't they immediately risking their career, maybe legal challenges, or in some cases even physical danger?
Absolutely.
How does this framework address that very real immediate danger to the individual versus the more abstract long-term risk to the state?
That is the moral courage that's inherent in this mandate. The framework acknowledges the risk, but it clarifies the moral hazard of the alternative. The consequences for those who obey illegal orders are severe.
Such as?
Personal liability, and crucially, legal complicity in the injustice. This concept explicitly destroys that old, tired defense of, I was just following orders. The individual is held responsible for the moral choice they made to participate in the crime against justice and the state.
We saw this principle articulated on a global scale at the Nuremberg trials after World War II, right? The idea that a higher moral duty supersedes immediate command.
Yes, we did.
But this jurisprudence, it applies that same principle all the way down to the level of a local bureaucrat or the low-ranking police officer. Is that correct?
Exactly. The source material emphasizes that this principle applies universally at every level within the state apparatus.
Let me paint a picture for you. A hypothetical scenario inspired by the context of these court stories.
Please do. Imagine a government treasury clerk. Let's call him Zishan. And Zishan receives a directive late on a Friday afternoon from a very high-ranking minister's office.
The classic Friday afternoon special.
The one nobody wants. The directive instructs Zishan to urgently process a massive, unauthorized expenditure order. It's to transfer public funds into a newly created shell company account.
Sounds suspicious.
It is. The paperwork is technically signed off, but Zishan, he recognizes procedural red flags. He knows this expenditure violates explicit financial regulations that were designed specifically to prevent corruption.
The pressure on him is immediate. Zishan knows if he refuses, his immediate superior, who just rubber-stamped the order, will probably fire him. Or worse, transfer him to some non-existent post in a remote area just to make his life miserable.
The framework provides clarity. Zishan's obedience to that minister's signature would make him actively complicit in the theft of public funds. It would be a breach of his amanah, his public trust.
But his resistance.
His act of resistance, his refusal to process that transfer, is not an act of disloyalty to the state. It's an act of fidelity. Fidelity to the Treasury regulations, to the constitutional spirit of transparency, and to the judicial philosophy that holds accountable those who abuse public trust.
So, the temporary loss of his personal security or his career stability, it's ultimately outweighed by the long-term, permanent damage that compliance would inflict on the state's legitimacy.
That's the calculation?
The risk of blind obedience is deemed far greater than the risk of righteous resistance.
That is the core idea. The ratio that illegal orders deserve disobedience is the ultimate safeguard against institutional decay. If a system consistently rewards blind transactional obedience over moral and legal discernment,
Then the state rapidly becomes an engine of injustice.
it does. This mandate ensures that every actor, from the top general down to the lowest clerk like Zishan, must remain a custodian of justice and constitutional principles.
What's truly profound here, when you lay it all out like that, is the realization that state power doesn't just flow from the top down. It's fundamentally checked at every single level by the individual's duty to a higher law.
And when state power is universally checked by this moral mandate of disobedience, the state is forced, at every turn, into accountability. This concept, derived from deep moral tradition and codified through modern democratic jurisprudence, is what separates a legitimate, rights-respecting state from an oppressive one.
This has been an incredibly detailed deep dive. We've drawn immense conceptual weight from the source material and, I hope, clarified principles that are just essential for understanding justice in action. Let's quickly review the journey we took for you.
Good idea. We started with the moral foundation. We established that obedience is strictly conditional on objective justice, or adl, and that's rooted in the profound concept of authority as a trust, an amanah. That sets the entire bar for legitimacy.
We then elevated that standard to the global standard, recognizing that constitutional morality, the overarching spirit of the law, provides the definitive legal bedrock for individual rights. It defends them against the transient or unjust will of any temporary majority or executive.
Following that, we examined the institutional safeguard. We defined democratic jurisprudence as the active, assertive role of the judiciary in interpreting law to maximize rights and accountability. And that provides legal protection and, really, sanction for those who choose to resist illegitimate commands, especially in politically challenging environments.
And finally, all three of those pillars converged on the ratio. The moral mandate illegal orders deserve disobedience. This fundamentally reframes resistance not as a failure of loyalty, but as the supreme act of fidelity to the state's true, just purpose.
So the key takeaway for you, informed by these court stories, is that your loyalty to the state must always be secondary to your loyalty to justice and the rule of law. The sources provide a clear, integrated pathway for understanding how to make that difficult but absolutely necessary choice.
We always promise you a final, provocative thought to mull over, something to build on this powerful concept long after this deep dive is done.
So if every individual actor within the state apparatus, every soldier, every bureaucrat, every judge, has a legal and a moral duty to disobey an illegal order, consider this.
Okay.
What are the consequences for a society that, despite this foundational principle, consistently rewards individuals for blind transactional obedience while punishing those who demonstrate moral and constitutional fidelity?
Wow. When institutions prioritize fear over conscience, they are actively cultivating corruption. So the question becomes, when does the immediate risk of standing alone become less dangerous than the certainty of institutional collapse brought about by universal, unthinking compliance? That is the ultimate moral calculation at the heart of the courtroom stories that inspire this mandate.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the moral limits of state power.
Catch you next time for more Deep Dive.